So this morning we want to start a conversation. And I think a number of years ago I went to, we can forward it one. A number of years ago I went to a youth conference out in San Diego. And there was this humongous blue blown up elephant outside of our convention center. Which of course everybody said, what's the elephant for? It's the elephant in the room. It's the elephant in church. It's porn. It's sex trafficking. In the church, I think we don't pause and actually take the time to look at things that are hard to look at sometimes. Sometimes it's easier to gloss over what might be especially sexual sin, because if I open that can of worms, then I become accountable as well. Or what if my family junk gets aired in public? I think these are tough conversations to have in the church. But having worked with children and students and college students primarily now this last 10 years, it is a pervasive issue that is invading our church pews. And we don't even know it's there or acknowledge it's there. It's been interesting to me as a Christian to attend Minnesota State public health events that are about changing the conversation around pornography. The state health department has recognized that pornography and trafficking are actually public health crises going on in our midst right now. And I think the church is just lagging way behind where the rest of the world is in public health. To make that personal for me, this last year I worked with a couple of young college women who are beautiful young women who love Jesus and have an incredible depth of relationship with him. And they attend a local Christian college. And both have struggled for different reasons through different stories with pornography. And they went to some of the spiritual leadership on campus, and they said, we want to start a group for women who struggle with lust, for women on college campus who actually struggle with pornography. And the church administration, or the school administration, heard that, thought it was a good idea, but then the more layers, as we do in churches, we make committees, or schools, we make committees, and the more people that got involved in that conversation, what they ended up saying to these two young women who were already embroiled in battling pornography was, well, I think we're going to do a study on purity because we want to hold up what's real and what's true and what's good. That's a great place to be if you're not already embroiled in the darkness that we're going to look at this morning. So I think sometimes churches and Christian schools with well-meaning purposes miss the boat in this conversation. This morning I want to acknowledge too that you may leave feeling like you were hit with a fire hose of information. Hang on to your seats. We're going to go through a lot of information, and keep reminding yourself that this is just the beginning of a conversation and that there's lots more to learn in months to come with future events. So today I want to start with just setting the stage for today's conversation from a Christian perspective. As I've attended these health seminars and symposiums and legal symposiums around the state this last 3 or 4 years now, the legal system and the frontline workers keep saying the church and society need to get upstream in this issue. We need to not try and address it where trafficking is happening or where pornography exists, but we need to go upstream and build healthy families. We need to build healthy systems where kids are not put at risk because of lack of resources, poverty, lack of health care, broken homes, inattentive parents, sexual abuse, incest. All of those things are risk factors that put kids on a path where they are at risk for becoming embroiled in either pornography or trafficking. So the state is asking the church to kind of help us build healthy families. We should be great at that, right? I also want to acknowledge today that I think because this issue is so broad-ranging, there are, I'm certain, people in this room who are not from the church, who are wondering, why do we start every session with a prayer? What is that prayer stuff? Really, we're talking to God when we pray. And I thought it might be helpful to remind all of us who are in the church, or those of us who are not familiar with the church, just kind of what the framework is for why this pornography and trafficking and strip clubs are such a big deal. As Christians, regardless of what denominational stripe we are from, we would agree that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And after he had set all of the moons and the stars and the planets on their axis and turning in perfect time, he created all that we know on the earth. And at the end of creation, he said it's good. And then the Bible says this thing, it says, and then God said to himself, let us, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, make mankind in our own image, male and female. He created them. He created them to bear the image of himself in all of the world. So as Christians, when we come to this work, when we come to these places with people who are broken and hurting, we see not the problem or the addiction or the pain, but we see a person of inestimable value because each of us are created to bear God's image. That means that we were given a responsibility to be stewards of the earth, to care for creation, which I know we haven't always done such a great job, and to care for one another. Because God has loved us, we love people, and we extend that love to other people. Also in Christian understanding, as was sprinkled through both talks before us this morning, God is good and perfect, and he created people to be in friendship with him. The Genesis talks about God walking in the cool of the evening in the garden with Adam and Eve. He created us to be in a right relationship with him, close with him. But even those of us outside of the faith recognize that God has a cosmic enemy. Anybody know his name? Satan, the devil. And the Bible, our Holy Scripture, our words that we take from God to us to show us how to live, talk about how Satan was once a beautiful angel, the most beautiful of all angels, who was kicked out of heaven because he wasn't satisfied being the most beautiful. He wanted to be God. And he has been trying to drive a wedge between God and people ever since. Have you ever been around somebody who's kind of just in a place of darkness and they're going to try and drag everybody there with them? Satan, we would say in Christendom, is trying to drive a wedge between God's best for us and, between God's best for us and a cheap counterfeit that he offers. I have a brief video that we're going to watch, just kind of outlining. This is from Fight the New Drug, which you'll hear referenced a couple times during this talk. And it's going to just give us a brief reasoning for why we need to talk about pornography. We live in a world that's constantly changing, but some things don't change. Words are always strong. You can click through all, yep, and one more. Here we go. Words are always powerful, but images are often more powerful. And in the Jewish tradition, which Christianity came out of, and Jesus used this image as well, there was this image for sin or things that separate us from God of yeast. And the reason that it was an image that was so powerful, Jesus spoke in this word picture about yeast, because yeast does what to bread dough? It helps to leaven it, right? It helps to make it rise so you get that soft bread. The top is unleavened bread, and it has no yeast in it, and it's flat. And the bottom has yeast. And it's this picture of, here's this little bit of yeast that goes into this big vat of dough. And when it is given warmth and time and darkness, sound familiar? The yeast infects the entire batch of dough and the bread rises. Then think about that, just extrapolate a little further. If you go to your pantry and you've stored crackers without yeast, and you've stored a loaf of bread in a plastic bag, which are you going to want to eat 2-3 weeks later? What happens to that yeast-infected dough over time when kept in the dark? Mold, and it's gross. That is the picture that God's people carried of sin in their life. And I want you to think about that as we look at pornography today. I have intentionally chosen, as I've prayed over this, to not use very many images for this reason. I have been researching this for several months, and there are things that even under God's protection, I have seen and I cannot unsee. I have witnessed people's pain, and I cannot unfeel that pain. I can give it to Jesus and trust that he is loving on those people, but I don't want to cause anybody here to see something that is going to trigger a trauma from their past. So instead, I want you to just carry this image of how even a small purchased sex act or a one-time visit to a strip club, a viewing of pornography can plant a seed of yeast that over time, if hidden and kept in the darkness and not brought out into the light, can impact an entire life, sometimes an entire family. So, I want to start with just this quote about words versus images. We learn better using images than words because, as I just say that I'm going to use all words today, images carry more information in a more compact form. Words are often perceived as opinions, while images are often perceived as an event or facts. We argue in our head against words or opinions, but much less often against events or facts, particularly images. The vast majority of pornography is visual. And it doesn't, I would say that doesn't even need to be applied to pornography. Think about children's television networks. I have a very sassy goddaughter who, she's a sassy one. But part of what I realized is as she's watching the Disney Channel or children's programming, she was acting out in ways that were rewarded on TV with a laugh track. What do we expect? And that's just for a kid, let alone an adult. We can go. The world has changed with our media. And this was astonishing to me. We're not going to cover all of them, but we have a comparison between 2000 and 2010. So this is already 6 years dated, so some of the statistics are already old. But look at this, 1 million daily Google searches. How many are on 2010? 3 billion daily Google searches. 0 iTunes downloads. How many of us downloaded iTunes this week? I did. 12,000 active blogs to now 152 million people want to gaze at their navel and tell the world what they're thinking. 0 tweets on Twitter. Sorry, I actually have a blog. I probably shouldn't say that, but 0 tweets a day on Twitter because it didn't exist, to now 33 billion tweets a day on Twitter. And how many of us get our news from our Twitter feed? I do in part every day. 0, this one, just crazy. YouTube wasn't around in 2000. Who knew? I would have thought it was around already. Now, 60 hours of YouTube videos are uploaded every single minute. You can never keep up. No wonder we're feeling like we're falling behind with what's going on in the world. And in 2000, no Facebook. Now, 845 million active Facebook users. That's back in 2010. It's beyond that now. And recently I had an evening at the Source Annex with a group of high school juniors, and Facebook came up as one of the recruiting tools that people use, or just inappropriate sexual content. And I asked for a raise of hands, if just ignoring the adult leaders who were in the room, and just to be honest and say who's accepted a friend request from somebody they didn't know. One kid had not accepted a friend request from somebody they didn't know. Every other student in the room had accepted friend requests from them. It is a different world. It's a different world. So next we have also, the world has changed with pornography. This is a 1953 cover of Playboy magazine with Marilyn Monroe. The one on the right is actually a documentary designed to show the degradation and how the porn industry uses up and spits out young women. And that's still the tamest picture that they came up with. And it's anti-porn. It's a different world. If we keep looking, there's just the coarsening of culture, and there's a whole little list of them here. I think back to my college years. I'm old, so it was like 82, 83, 84. R-rated movies had sex scenes in them that were horrifying, that are now found on ABC, NBC, CBS, main primetime television. Fill in the blank. Pimp My Ride, Pimp My Crib, you can fill it in 20 different ways. It's part of our cultural language now. Or if I'm posting on Instagram, I have friends who do this way too much. They are in love with their food and the beautiful way it was presented at Travail Kitchen in Robbinsdale. And so they post food, porn. Yeah. We talk about food as porn. What is up with that? The language is coarsened. I was at school recently, and I was walking past, and with no shame whatsoever, one boy having a conversation with another boy as I was walking past, and they're looking at a girl down the hall, And the guy says, I'd tap that. It's just part of everyday conversation that's been coarsened. Sexting. Same group of high school juniors asked, how many of you have seen a sexual image on somebody's phone or online that was of a peer, so somebody in high school, that was meant to be private? Every hand went up. Every single hand went up. What is put out there doesn't just disappear. It travels around, and there's a price to be paid for that often. I know a woman who felt like she needed to get collagen treatment for her lips and get that bee-stung look so her husband could have more of a porn star experience. I know another woman who I ran into with bandages and bruising on her face, and innocent me, I thought she'd been in a car accident or something, and no, my husband just thought I should get a little work done. And she's a beautiful woman. A girlfriend whose boyfriend insists that she needs breast augmentation. Middle school parties, regularly, oral sex is kind of the kissing experiment instead of going in the closet now. You have oral sex instead of kissing parties. There is a real coarsening of our culture. I think I would argue that all of these things left unaddressed feed into a search for more pornography, more experiential experimentation. And then I think also the prevalence of porn. Gail Dines, who actually did a study here in Minnesota a number of years ago, said that there's always been pornography, but there's not always been a porn industry. 40 million US adults regularly visit internet pornography websites, and 10% of adults admit to internet sexual addiction. That was from 2006. The numbers have shown that they've gone up. 47% of Christians say that pornography is a problem in their home. And again, that's probably low. By age 17, 93% of boys, 62% of girls have been exposed to porn. Many of those initial exposures are accidental, or they pop up in video games, they pop up in other activities that they're on the website. But it's not just the ease of being able to reach these things. On average, the 13 to 24-year-olds who come across pornography at least monthly consider viewing pornographic images less immoral than failing to recycle, the stat that Grant used earlier. And 14% of senior pastors surveyed currently struggle with using porn. It is not something that is just easy to click on any longer. It is actually predatory. They have designed computer systems now so that they figure out through algorithms your type that you might be interested in. And they target you with advertisements. Or they'll do have you ever had one of those force click windows? Hopefully not with pornography, but maybe with something else where it looks like you're gonna click to get out of it, but you can't click to get away from the page. No matter what button you click, your option is to move forward. They are predatory now. And half of our teenagers and 75% of young adults aged 18 to 24 in this recent Barna study that came out this last week say that they come across pornography at least monthly, whether they're seeking it or even if they're not. The most common reasons for seeking out porn is getting younger and younger. It is not just adults. And for those of us who are kind of living in a sequestered space of our lives where we're intentionally choosing not to engage with porn, need to be aware that there are people reaching into the cyber lives of our children. And And they're looking up porn for personal arousal, for boredom and curiosity. And girls are catching up with boys. 12 years ago, I would hear about porn addiction or porn struggles from the boys, from the guys, from the men in college. Now I'm hearing it from middle school and high school girls. I've also seen through the sexualization and the pornification of our culture. I mean, how many of our middle school kids come to programming at church on Wednesday night with pink across their butt or across the front of their shirt? Yep. Victoria's Secret had a genius in their marketing department at some point, because every person who watches porn knows that pink comes from Victoria's Secret. So do you think they're looking at, if you struggle with an addiction to porn, you are not going to look at that 12 or 13-year-old girl's junk in her trunk and just read the word pink. You're going to go other places in your mind. And Victoria's Secret is brilliant. They knew what they were doing. Also, because of technology access, the average first exposure is now 9 years old. We're going to talk about the brain chemistry for adults, but teenagers or children are even more susceptible to the rewiring of the way our neurons fire in our brain. And we know this. Kids are moldable, right? We raise them up in the way they're supposed to go because we want them to learn to make wise decisions. But other people are interjecting themselves into our kids' stories. This next part, I'm gonna just give full permission. If something in this triggers you, close your eyes, put your head down, walk out of the room. No one is gonna judge you. I prayed about whether to include these next two slides or not, but I think for me, growing up on a farm in rural Minnesota, grew up in the church all of my life, not actively seeking out porn. I had no clue up until 4 years ago how the face of porn had changed. Remember that Marilyn Monroe image on the Playboy? Not anymore. You can't even find that anymore. So through content analysis, this group in 2007 randomly selected 50 titles from the top 250 pornographic films, okay? And they had, in those 50 films, there were 304 scenes. 3,376 different acts of verbal and physical abuse using the perpetrator action target scale. Let's stop right there first. This perpetrator action target scale, I want us to wrap our head around this. When they went to analyze these films, scientific, data-driven, logical thinking people, the perpetrator action target scale, PAT, counts as one act of aggression, an issue that takes place when all three elements are present and unchanged. So for example, 1P, the perpetrator, a man, does action, slaps a woman. The woman is the target. So perpetrator, an action, and a target. Man slaps woman. In that scene, if he slaps her 10 times, it still counts as one act of aggression because the perpetrator, the action, and the person who's receiving that have not changed. Make sense? So there could be 10 slaps, but that's only one act of aggression in this scene. That would change if, for example, this guy is joined by another guy who comes in then and hits her as well, and she is still the same receptor. But because there's a different perpetrator, that then counts, even though she's been slapped now 11 times, that counts as 2 acts of aggression. Does that make sense? So using this scale now, 11.5 acts of aggression per scene. Who knows how many that really is? Aggression was rewarded for the perpetrator 68% of the time. There was a neutral response to aggression 32% of the time. And it was discouraged 0% of the time. Positive sexual behavior represented just 10% of all actions in all of those 50 films. I would say that we are currently tying some of our most powerful pleasure centers in men's brains, in their bodies, physically, and in their hearts, directly to the pain of women. So this same group, plus Sun and Lieberman, 2 more researchers, did a study 3 years later. And they, again, went back to look at content analysis, and they showed that now over 88% of scenes in each of those films that they randomly selected again, new ones, involve acts of physical aggression. 70% of those aggressive acts being perpetrated are done by men. 87% of aggressive acts being committed against women, which means that if there is other action, it's another woman hurting a woman, not a man. These acts stand in sharp relief against more intimate acts, which were relatively infrequent. Remember the 10% from the last study, such as issuing compliments or embracing or kissing and laughing. I have a friend whose husband struggled with porn and is in recovery. And she said the thing that she missed the most from their relationship was that he didn't hold her and he didn't kiss her on the mouth any longer. Because it rewired him to see her as a commodity, not to see her as a person, as the beautiful image bearer that she is. They lost that sense of intimacy. Researchers found that 98% of pornographic movies, this one's a hard one. Men and women aren't even coming together as God created us to come together in our most intimate moment. 98% of the time that a man ejaculates in pornography, and this is graphic, it is outside of a woman's body or someplace that's not going to lead to procreation. Let's say that. So these women in porn, I was at a hockey game with friends the other night and not a believer, kind of a rough and tumble hockey guy and a lawyer, so really smart. And we were talking about the fact that I was doing this this talk, and he was like, well, you know, I can never picture myself ever paying for sex, but you know, if I want to go to a strip club or if I want to you know, watch porn, or that's not a big deal because those women want to be there. So I want to take a look just at facts on whether there is really empowerment for women or if there's imprisonment for women. Women's complex choices were reflected in both of these earlier talks today. It is saying that women have a choice to participate in pornography or in trafficking. It really undermines the truth of their story, and it really benefits the people who are making money off of those women or children or boys. The producers, the pimps, and the consumers. If the most important thing to a young girl is to be hot, sexy, and desirable to men, what better way than through porn? Why women actually enter porn is often a shared history of abuse, which we talked about this morning. They've experienced poverty or homelessness and don't seem to have another way to earn a living, or through fraudulent advertising. There are scams all over the place that range from Grant's example of the guy offering shelter to a modeling agency. And I think also there is this idea of social training in a pornified culture. Our girls and boys are growing up more and more in a society that doesn't see this as problematic. They think it's a totally free choice. Sometimes they do enter, in the documentary that was referenced before, a couple of those girls entered because they thought it would be a great way to get guys. The average age to come into porn as an actress is 18. But if we think about it, my husband is not only a therapist, but he's a psych professor for college. The adolescent brain doesn't finish maturing until, 26 now in a male? What did you know? How informed were your decisions when you were 18? What women actually get from porn are the following. You can just put them all up there. Psychological damage, emotional damage, physical damage, increased health risks, drug and alcohol addiction. A survivor of the porn industry, Shelley Lubin, says, lying is the native language of porn stars because they can't afford to tell you the truth. It would ruin the amount of money in their paychecks. Don't believe porn actresses when they proudly proclaim they enjoy making porn movies. They are acting. Initially, when I was putting together this PowerPoint, I had two images selected. Maybe some of you remember a Duke law student or undergrad law student who has been featured on talk shows and in news shows. She actually provided herself as an escort. And she proudly went on national television and proclaimed that she is going to be graduating from school debt-free. I'm empowered in doing this. But in one of the documentaries that I watched, one of those images that I will never get out of my mind was that same young woman proclaiming to all who would listen that she is empowered and making this choice on her own. Less than 3 months into her journey into doing pornography and escort work, was doing what they call gonzo porn. And there's just an incredible amount of shaming and violence against the women. And here is this still screen of her face just matted with mascara that has run down from crying from her pain, and she's trying to smile through it. I don't care what they're saying up front. Those women have value. They are not meant to be objectified, brutalized. Because the money is good, that justifies our society. Treating them abominably? Absolutely not. We have consequences for our actions. Like I said, this is the beginning of a conversation. These are two sites where I would suggest, if you want further information, go to these sites. The first is Fight the New Drug. It is actually a non-Christian site, and they are doing amazing work at fighting pornography as a new drug. There have been studies done that show that pornography is as addictive to the brain chemistry as heroin is. It creates pathways like a superhighway in our mind, creating a craving and an addiction. And they have 87 pages in a guide that categorizes their harm to our brain, to our heart, and our relationships, and the social cost, the public health crisis that it is. That's at fightthenewdrug.org. Covenant Eyes is another organization that is Christian in based, and they have a free download entitled Your Brain on Porn. And you can access that through, and many other videos and articles and a blog. They also have a great resource for accountability partners for men. So or women, if you struggle with pornography, it's good to let that light in and have someone that you can be accountable with in that relationship, bring them into that. Moving on, just common sense things. Watching porn decreases your sexual satisfaction. It trains men and women to be consumers, not lovers. Gosh, people don't want the emotional commitment. It's a hookup culture now. In an experiment where groups of viewers were exposed to large amounts of porn, medium amounts of porn, and no amounts of porn, activities like anal sex, group sex, sadomasochism, and bestiality, the percentage of people who thought those were common activities doubled and tripled among users of porn. Continually watching pornography has been shown to produce an escalation effect. So in other words, 15 years after this first experiment here, he comes back and he wants to do a longitudinal study. And that was a tough study to look at, because what it showed was, much like the yeast, what starts with pornography as a small act or a small viewing or a rather innocent viewing escalates, because the more your dopamine fires in your brain and it creates this super highway to your pleasure center, the more you need something unique. The more you need something that's more hardcore, the more you need something that's different so that the receptors fire again. Much like a drug addict or an alcoholic craves more and has a dependency on that. That's what it does to our brains. These are just a few consequences they kind of go without saying. One that I think is really interesting on here is that, you know how when you're watching the news at night, if you're a news junkie like I am, there is a preponderance of ads for little blue pills or people in bathtubs on the beach but here's the deal. I learned from a physician friend that increasingly the reason that there are so many ads for erectile dysfunction is that there are young men, teens, 20s, 30s, who cannot function sexually with another person, face to face, body to body, because of their addiction to pornography. And so they are in turn turning then, we've got another expert in the house who works in this area, they are turning to medication in order to maintain in order to maintain an erection. Pornography leads to this rape ideology where men not only objectify women, but these are all statistically proven. You can put them all up there. Their minds begin to see women not as another human being bearing the image of God, but they begin to think less of them. Women don't know their own minds. Men know better than women. They become misogynistic. A woman might not want it at first, but once she gets a taste of hot sex, she can't get enough. That sounds like a guy you want to date. They think women are sexually manipulative. People are coming on to them when they're not. They create these scripts with women who are in the bars or in their workplaces. Women are sluts who get what they deserve. Or college, oh my goodness, so many times getting her drunk is a way to get her in the mood. So many college campuses. And all women are whores at heart and want to be by any available man. in addition to rape ideology, which we think, oh my goodness, that's far out there. I'd have to use it for a long time. It also changes our attitudes. And these are, again, graphic. You can choose to read them if you want, or you can put your head down if you don't. It's sobering. Really sobering. If we go to the next slide, we have one more on changed attitudes that occur. Deeply disturbing. As a person who is friends with a number of women who have grown up with incest in their families or sexual abuse as children in their families. I had lunch with a wonderful young woman this week on Thursday. She knew I was doing this talk, and she talked about how she struggled with pornography through all of her teen years, till her junior year when she went to a church retreat and heard the gospel. Because her dad, at age 5, used pornography to groom her for her abuse and incest. There are now predators online who are making how-to videos for grooming children. This has got to stop. Our children are not the enemies. They are ours. We must take back this territory from the enemy. We cannot turn a blind eye to what is happening to our children. This girl grew up in the church. Her dad was an elder. And now, through the advent of pornography and its prevalence, more and more people are thinking it's normal because there are so many voices online that are telling them that this is okay. I know I'm intense at this moment, but I'm not going to apologize. We need to stand in the gap for those children. We need to pay attention to those kids who are marginalized, who are coming to our classrooms with marked differences in their personalities, with sudden changes in their cleanliness, or overreaction to touch that should otherwise be appropriate. We need to pay attention. These are all from the documentary that was up earlier. The porn industry is actually steering men to younger girls. There are 18-year-old women who go and get braces on their teeth so that they can portray younger children. While most people condemn child pornography, much of mainstream porn legitimizes and incites adult sexual desire for sexual use of children. Their scripts are the adult neighbor with the teenage neighbor girl, the stepdad with the daughter. This porn is legal because the actress is 18, but she's presented in childlike ways. So if we can go to the next one. There is hope and help. What is brought into the light can find healing. If we rip off those blinders that we have in the church and lean into that discomfort, those areas where we kind of don't want to look because it might be icky or it might be difficult. we can actually bring community and accountability into this. The good news, God has wired us in such a way that we can find health, wholeness, and healing. Our brain is capable of healing itself, much like addiction to other things. If we separate ourselves from that addiction, and we build healthy systems and we think healthy thoughts, our brain can be rewired. It increases your quality of work when you do it. You can regain the ability to talk to the opposite sex without the terrible layer of sexualization in your heads. You can have renewed interpersonal connection and a capacity for intimacy once again. That's how God's good gift was meant to be intimate within the relationship of two people brought together over a long period of time. These are 3 places that I would, 4 places that I would recommend. Again, we're beginning the conversation. Covenant Eyes, which I understand that Trinity is doing a follow-up session on in a couple weeks. Covenant Eyes and XXXchurch.com both have accountability partners online. My husband and I are both accountability partners for a number of people, and we get a monthly or sometimes a weekly, sometimes daily, depending on the struggle, a report in our email box that just allows us to have a conversation. If somebody that is struggling with porn, they know somebody else is out there, aware of their issue, and they can have somebody that's not going to shame them, but is going to help to enter into those hard conversations with them if they slip up. Also at XXXchurch.com, I'm a fan. They came and spoke at our church. They were the guys with the big blue elephants. They came and spoke at our church upper room, probably 2005 and 2006. And they have a quiz online that says, if you're wondering, am I addicted to porn? I don't know. I don't think it's a problem. Take the quiz. And then they have this section called Start Here. They have a ton of scenarios. I caught my child viewing porn online. What do I do? I think my spouse is cheating. I'm in an affair. I want to get out of the strip club. Just a whole plethora of resources and scenarios that you can plug into. Josh McDowell just has published a paper called Just One Click Away, and it's got some great family resources and Bible studies for teenagers. And then Fight the New Drug. I follow them on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. I am a huge fan. They are not a Christian organization, but they are fighting this fight out in the trenches, particularly with college students, and they have a free accountability program for anyone who's 21 or younger, which is great. I want to close this.